Well, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I was meaning to continue with the video format, but I had left my phone in the office the other day, so we had to go back to writing. Um, Tonight, we're going to talk about, and just before I start, again, some sugar will be supplied so that I'll be pepped up a little bit. Um, Tonight we're going to talk about a work called by Spinoza again, called "On the Improvement of the Understanding," and I think from what I can gather, it was a work that was not finished. It's a pretty short work. Probably take most people about a couple hours to read, but it's a book that's sort of designed to explain very simple fashion. How is it that people can start to have better ideas and clarify their thought, form ideas that are more true and less false? And so this post will go under the practical wisdom post, as we talked about with John Dewey, and some of the other thinkers. This would be sort of a practical application of philosophy. Because, of course, as we go about the world, there's hundreds of decisions we have to make on a daily basis. Some are much more trivial than others. I could have decided to, buy the peanut version of M&Ms or something else. I could have decided to go to one place other than the next for where I ate tonight. Of course, where you live, is more important. What you decide to do for your career, who you decide to be with, who your friends are. The decisions continue to get more and more meaningful. So there's obviously a gradation here, and the trivial ones, I think, I'm not going to say are ones that philosophy really needs to speak to, obviously. But some of the more important ones could be things that philosophy can give us some guidance as to how to make better decisions. Not specific guidance in terms of telling us exactly what to do, but giving us sort of methods of thinking about how to make good decisions in our lives. And I think in that sense, it is a very practical and important discipline, because on the whole, if you make better and better decisions in your life will be better and better. It just seems that you are the individual, and his moment-to-moment decisions are basically all you are. And the better your decisions become, and the more humane and reflective of who you are and good thinking, that will have an effect. I remember when I was practicing at another place, working at another firm, and one of the attorneys on the case told me that you don't win a case by just showing up at trial. Cases in California sometimes take 2 years to finish, and he said, you win a case by making good decisions every day, piling up good decision after good decision, and that's how you win. And so I think in a sense life is no different. That is to just say, how can philosophy help us in making better decisions? And Spinoza, in this work of his on the improvement of the understanding, gives us some interesting ideas as to that question. And I want to go through them today. It's interesting. He starts out the work there's a lot of prefatory stuff in the beginning. He talks about finally sort of what his project was and how he got to this point of wanting to write a work that's aimed at improving people's understanding and the mind's understanding over ideas and decision making. And he says that he was driven basically by much of what he saw in society as being sort of poor decisions and the uselessness of a lot of human knowledge. He was driven to finally see if he could determine whether there was any, quote, real good having power to communicate itself, which would affect the mind. Is there any real good that would be able to communicate to the mind and strengthen the mind to the exclusion of everything else? And he says whether, if there would be, whether this thing would enable the discovery of this good for the mind would enable someone to enjoy continuous, supreme, and unending happiness. So that is sort of what he's trying to do. He's trying to find the power of the mind that would affect the mind and that would impart lasting happiness to people by making good decisions. And he said, as he was thinking about this and thinking about how to go about writing such a book, he thought he was faced with a problem in that he thought that for most people and most lives and the ordinary lives that are esteemed by men, he says, there are three things that people are going for: riches, fame, and the pleasures of the senses. And he says, with these three objects, the mind is so absorbed that it has little power to reflect on any different good. And so that's an important thought right there. So he starts out, even in the beginning, by saying that for most people, for most lives, the way most people are living, there's just no time. There's no time and there's no space in the mind to think about a lot of different things, to reflect on any other different good other than riches, fame, and the pleasures of the senses, none of which involve correcting or healing the mental understanding of people. People are too absorbed with those things. So it seems even at the outset, he says, that for someone to profit from what he's saying and to actually improve their understanding, they need to make space for this project. If someone is just focused on those three things, there's not going to be enough attention or time or desire or space to improve the understanding. He says shortly thereafter that he himself decided to give up the ordinary things that everyone else was pursuing: pleasure, pleasures of the senses, fame, and riches. And he said that he had decided to do that because, on the one hand, those things that we just talked about, he thought he wasn't sure whether they were in fact good. And he thought that knowledge and understanding was certainly a good, although he was uncertain whether he would get it. And so he was faced with this choice. Does it make sense to neglect these things that he wasn't so sure they were good, but that had some good qualities to them, riches, fame, and the pleasures of the sense, in exchange for improving his understanding? Is that something that he wanted to do? And he's very honest about struggling with that question, and struggling with the question of whether he could in fact attain any wisdom or attain any improvement of the understanding. He struggled with that. But then he says after he started on his path of pursuing wisdom, after a short while, things became more and more easy for him. He says that after I recognized that the acquisition of wealth, sensual pleasure, or fame is only a hindrance to more knowledge and understanding, if these things are sought as ends, not as means, if that becomes the sole purpose of your life, and then he says, as I realize that if these things are sought as means, they will be under restraint and far from being hindrances, or further not a little the end for which they are sought, as I will show in due time. And then he says, although these intervals were at first rare and of very short duration, yet afterward, as the true good became more and more discernible to me, they became more frequent and more lasting. So it was something that he pursued. He was uncertain about the things he was giving up, but as he pursued it more and more, these things became these pleasures, the pleasures of the mind, and the improvement in his understanding became more discernible to him. It became more understandable to him. It wasn't something that he just decided, from one day to the next he was going to give up these things and then pursue wisdom, and overnight he would get wisdom. But it was a process that slowly worked its way into him and had its effects on him, which is, I think, an important point to remember, especially in a culture, I think, where we live, where people are very focused on short-term results and short-term profit from things, very, very quick. And he's saying that the improvement of the understanding and wisdom is not something that comes quick like that. So the whole project here is something that he's engaged in to increase his wisdom and his understanding. And he says that while he was undergoing that, while he was working on improving his understanding, gaining wisdom, he would follow some ground rules. One was to still carry on his normal life. Basically, he wasn't he didn't go into a cave somewhere. He continued to work, and he said that he indulged in pleasures only insofar as they were necessary to preserve his health, and he endeavored to only make as much money to, again, preserve his life and health. So he was focused on his understanding and wisdom. He attended to his other needs only to the extent needed, and that was the way that he said he could improve his understanding. So that's sort of the prefatory remarks here. Now, getting to the issues, getting to the core issue of the book, which is really the interesting one, is, again, how is it that people make decisions, and how is it that we can improve decisions? And of course, any decision is a result of certain ideas in the mind that are motivating people to act in one way or the other. Again, if we assume that people aren't insane, there are ideas, there are motivations that are pushing people in one direction or another. So to correct the understanding and to see some benefit from it, you'd have to fix, as Spinoza said, the good ideas, distinguish the good ideas in your mind from the bad ideas. And for him, the way he sort of describes these things, he describes the good ideas as true ideas and the bad ideas as false or confused ideas or conceptions. And so that's sort of a big theme throughout the work, that false ideas, which are the ones that he's obviously, once you get rid of those, obviously you're left only with true ideas. The false ideas and conceptions are the ones that he really focuses on, and he wants to eradicate through his method, because obviously a false idea is going to cause a bad decision because you're acting on something that's not true. That's sort of foundational. You can't get more basic than that. You're making a decision based either on inadequate facts or for the wrong reasons, and you don't see it at the time, but over time it becomes clear to you. So what he's trying to do is improve the understanding so that your decisions are better because your ideas are better. And so he talks about these false ideas, confused ideas, and he says the first part of the method is, again, to distinguish and separate the true idea from other perceptions, and to keep the mind from confusing the true ideas from those which are false, fictitious, and doubtful. He says, I intend to dwell on this point at length. And so the false ideas are ones that he repeatedly says are ones that will be exposed as false when we, quote, clearly and distinctly think about them. That's sort of his key phrase. to sort of see the falseness of an idea, all you have to do, Spinoza says, is sort of bear down on it. Bear down on what the idea is, examine it clearly and distinctly. Now, of course, that, I don't know who said this, but one of the thinkers that we were reading said, if you use the right words, everyone will sort of embrace an idea because you're using sort of the magic words. So, of course, to say that an idea, or that to think of an idea clearly and distinctly is to eradicate the falsehood of the idea, or to bear down on it is to expose its falseness. Is that just is that just sort of a way to tell people something that will gain their approval without really impacting any sort of thought they have? Is it just something that, just words strung together that look good in Spinoza's work, but they don't really help you or me make better decisions? So that's sort of one challenge always with these philosophical principles is think about what is actually going on. Move beyond the eloquence of the words to think about what is it that this idea is really going to impart, and how true is it, other than once I strip away the eloquence, or the words that are always likely to get people to approve of something. So he says, obviously, the clear and distinct impression of an idea, of a false idea, will expose its falsity. And so he talks about how is it that you can focus on these ideas and fixate on them and expose their falsity. And he says, he gives us actually some fairly practical insights throughout the book, which I want to focus on. First, he says, generally cultivate your mind, cultivate your understanding. The more your understanding has strengthened itself, the more knowledge you have, the more mental cultivation you've undergone, the less your mind will even be interested in entertaining fictitious ideas. I think we talked about this last time, that there's sort of an instinctual rejection mechanism as your mind starts to grow and your mind starts to gain sort of power, and you start to think of things more clearly. The old ideas that you used to just be mesmerized by, they don't have the same effect on you because you've thought through things, and your mind is more sophisticated. Your mind is more able to see through certain things. So he says, in general, cultivate your understanding. He says, typically, false ideas, confused ideas, are complex. They are ones where too many ideas are swirling about. And he says, simplify the idea. Simple ideas for him are often true. And for him, he gives the example often of a circle, the idea of a circle, the idea of motion, just a body in motion, the idea of a body in rest, sort of simple geometrical basic principles. These are the ideas that are true. And these are the ones that he says we can learn from nature. Basic facts that we've learned from nature, simple ideas. These are the ones you should start with. He says, simple things can't be fabricated. We can understand them. They are true, and we have every right to rely on them as true. He says, beyond relying on sort of simplicity, the simplicity of an idea, don't rely excessively on hearsay and sort of narrow experience that you've had or someone else has had. For example, anecdotes. Move beyond those things. If you just rely on those, your ideas are going to be, while simple in that sense, not correct still. So simplicity shouldn't be confused with relying only on just one or two pieces of information. It's sort of simplicity is more of the basic elemental truth. For example, again, think of the idea of a circle. rather than simplicity as in only a few ideas or only a few facts that go into an idea. He also says you have to understand the essence of something. True ideas are focused on the essence rather than sort of the ornaments or the things that have been heaped on the essence of something. So if you think about, I don't know what example to give, but if you think about entering a certain sort of job or career, and you think about, should I do this or not? You need to focus on what is the essence of that job, rather than the ornaments or the particulars that are added onto it. What is it that this job is likely to consist of, or on a realistic level over the next 20 years? What has it really consisted of in the past 20, 30 years? What are the common activities that are most frequently engaged in? Don't focus on sort of minor stuff on the sides, in whatever that means for the person on the job or whatever. But focus on the essences of things. When you start to confuse the essence of a thing with the particulars and things, sort of ornaments added onto it, that's when your idea becomes confused, and it's likely to be false, because again you're not clearly and distinctly understanding the essence or the idea itself. He says to obviously avoid that, take any complex idea, break it into its component parts. He says it's much easier to detect error and confusion and falsity in the component parts rather than when you're trying to think of the whole abstract idea. Again, if you think about a career choice, focus on the individual components of the career and think about what those all would involve and entail for you, rather than just generally thinking about, I want to be a professor because I think, being a professor would allow me to pursue wisdom, for example. That thought is too, I would think you would say, that thought is still too complex at that level. You have too many things going on in it. Break it into its component parts and try to figure out what each of those component parts would mean, and you'll be able to detect some of the errors in your idea. He says, don't think of things too abstractly. Again, it's not really sort of a lot of things you have to watch out for here. On the one hand, he says, think of the simplicity of the idea. On the other hand, he says, don't think of it too abstractly. So, as we were just saying, in the professor example, it might be true in general or as an abstract idea, but you still need to focus on more of the particulars of that job or that choice. You can't, it's too abstract to say, as a professor, I'm going to be a professor because I think it advances the project of wisdom or gaining wisdom. It's just too abstract. He says, don't confuse thinking about something from imagining, from the imagination. He says, don't confuse the understanding with the imagination. The imagination sort of does its own things. We imagine certain things. We want certain things. We wish for certain things to be true. We hope that certain things are true. We trust that certain things are true. Those are all ideas we have. But that's not understanding things as true. It's wanting things to be true, but it's not understanding things as literally true. And he says, be very careful that you're not mixing the two things in your mind. He says, distinguish between things you know and things you don't know. Always do that. And that would sort of fit within the imagination and the understanding that the things you know, you can obviously rely on, try to learn more, but you also have to be really clear about what you don't know in any decision. What are the factors that you know you don't know, and that maybe even you can't even know that you don't know. So focus on those things as well. Last sort of thing that he brings up is be careful with the words you use. Words themselves, he says, many confused ideas or false ideas are the result of words sort of used imprecisely. Um, it's very careful. Be very careful with the words you use, and I think it's a particular problem today in America as people start to use, I think, more sort of in day-to-day thought and day-to-day conversations become more slang-like, and there's more shortcuts in expressing ideas. And I think a lot of those words sort of hide a lot of concepts, or they're not making the concepts clear. And he says, just focus on those words. Make sure the words you're using in your ideas are the best words, and they actually describe the idea. He says words are often formed according to popular fancy in the imagination, which exists not in our understanding but in our imagination. Again, cliches would be a great example here, or just any sort of words you're using or phrases that you just you're just trudging out, repetitively and rotely, but you don't really understand. You haven't focused on what it means. Those are the kinds of words that Spinoza thinks introduce confusion to your ideas. So avoid cliches, avoid as much as you can. Avoid words that really you don't understand. Avoid things that just don't make a lot of sense to you. So those are some of the basic points in the work. I think he does acknowledge later on that in some sense there is a limit. Obviously, we can improve our understanding, but there's a limit. There's no our power to form good ideas and true ideas does not proceed to infinity, he says. So it does stop somewhere. But I think his original contribution here is, and I think his best contribution here is this idea of focusing clearly and distinctly on ideas, taking time and exposing the idea for what it is, thinking about it, not relying on hearsay or narrow experiences, trying to understand the essences of things, defining things correctly. These are all sort of mental habits that I think are very useful in eradicating confused ideas or false ideas, and always rely on some of the simple truths that you can build up from, rather than focusing on some high-level idea that has 10 or 12 different things in it, and you haven't really broken down the components. So I think he's on to a lot of very good insights here in terms of improving one's decision making and ideas about what it is to make good decisions. I think again the enemy, as he was correct even in the beginning, I think, to say that the problem here is that for many people, once they've spent time focusing on riches, fame, and the pleasures of sense, their mind is so absorbed that there's no time to do any of this. So I think he's right to identify that as a problem, and he's right to identify some ideas, or a lot of bad ideas, as being fundamentally resulting from confusion in the mind and a lack of a systematic, diligent effort to eradicate confusion. Now, is there anything that we could say? Is this sort of, again, is this idealistic? Is this something that this sort of works well on, in a philosophical treatise, but doesn't really apply to everyday life? I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on your view of reality. I think mainly, if you view reality as incredibly complex, shades of gray everywhere, perspectives that you can't know, and things you just don't know, things circling all around that can affect your decisions that you don't know, and things that you'll never know, and just layers and layers of reality that you know that impinge on everything, that motivate everything, then I don't think you're going to be too sympathetic to this, because I think you're going to feel that despite trying to bear down on an idea, that you still won't get the clarity you need. You still won't have the knowledge. You won't have all the facts. If you view, on the other hand, if you view reality and reason and thinking as, first of all, if you view reality as simpler, and if you view reason as more powerful, and the mind is more powerful in terms of showing you the right paths, giving you the right decisions, helping you bear down and focus on things, and how to make better decisions, I think then you're going to be more sympathetic to his ideas. And I think one thing that you can do is just think of decisions in your life that were good, and see if they fit sort of some of the things he talked about. Were those decisions ones that you had clear conceptions of what you were deciding, and you eradicated as much confusion as you could. You broke it down into component parts. You defined things simply based on elemental truths. And think about bad decisions in your life. Think about what caused those decisions, what you didn't do, whether, in retrospect, of course, the things that Spinoza is talking about here in terms of cultivating better decision-making could have avoided those bad decisions, not relying on narrow anecdotes or narrow experiences or hearsay, focusing on the essences of a particular idea rather than all its ornaments, focusing on sort of breaking down things, not thinking of things too abstractly. Think about distinguishing between wanting something to be true and knowing that it's true. If those are things that you think could have improved it, then I think Spinoza certainly has some insight here for all of us. So I think with that, we're going to end this post and see you pretty soon. Okay, bye-bye.